This meeting to order. This is the 142nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Welcome to our witnesses as we begin our second meeting on our study of settlement services in Canada. Thank you for joining us. Just before we begin the meeting, though, I just want to update the committee on a couple of meeting announcements. You remember at the last meeting, I undertook to schedule some meetings, and we've just been able to actually finally get them scheduled. Just for your calendars, today and Thursday we will do settlement services study. That'll be the second and third meetings of this study, which is a minimum of 7 meetings per your motion. There's no meeting on Monday the 18th, as in Ontario that is Family Day. On February the 20th, we will be having a meeting with on Supplementary Estimates B, which you have asked me to do. I've approached both Minister Hussen and Mr. Blair. We have tried to schedule meetings. Mr. Blair is being requested at Public Safety as well, and we have very limited days. As you'll know, there are a number of opposition days being called, so the reporting back could happen even earlier than by the end of March, or we would be deemed having received them. So both ministers have agreed to change schedules and be available on February the 20th. And they will be given short period of time, 5 minutes each, to speak, to give the committee enough time to question them on supplementary estimates B. Just for your further noting, February 25th and 27th, we will return to the the migration study. You've requested 3 more meetings on that. We'll have one on the 25th, one on the 27th, and just to alert you, I'm going to be trying to schedule a special meeting of the committee to accomplish the 3 meetings you've requested before we have the 2-week break at that point, so the analysts can continue working on the evidence to get ready for a meeting where you would give instructions for the writing of the report when we come back in March. So I'll just cover that again. 4th and 6th of February, settlement services. February 18th, no meeting. February 20th, 2 ministers for supplementary estimates B. February 25th and 27th, back to the migration study with probably a 3rd meeting that week, which we will try to schedule with as few conflicts as possible. Any questions? Ms. Rempel.
Will the ministers be appearing in separate panels or in one panel?
They're going to appear in one panel. The supplementary estimates are actually the budgetary responsibility of only one minister. That would be Minister Hussen, because that is his responsibility. Minister Blair will be here on the policy questions with respect to irregular migration, because he has that file, but he doesn't have budgetary responsibility for it.
So to be clear, Minister Blair does not have any responsibility for allocating resources that he is in charge of?
I will ask you to ask him that.
But you just said that.
I know that the fiduciary responsibility is to the Minister of IRCC with respect to the budget of IRCC. How that gets played out between ministers, I don't know. But I know that the responsibility technically falls to that minister. Mr. Tilson.
Yes, will the departments appear at separate times?
The department officials will be with them, as is our custom, and then they will stay for an additional hour following the ministers.
So both departments will be on at the same time?
I would have to confirm, but I believe there's only one department, and that's IRCC. There's no,
well,
Mr.
Really.
Blair doesn't have a department.
Okay.
Good. That's very good. Let's welcome our guests. I'm going to begin with Mr. Hussen, the other Ahmed Hussen. Welcome, and we're going to start with you with your presentation, and then we will go to the 2 witnesses joining us by video conference from Saskatchewan and from British Columbia. So, Mr. Hussen, you have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. And my name is Ahmed Hussein. I'm the Executive Director of the TNO, the Neighborhood Organization, which is a settlement agency in Toronto. And I would like to speak on the range of settlement services provided. So basically, one of the important thing is to do a needs assessment of all newcomers who come to our organization or similar organization who provide settlement services. Basically, the whole family or some of the family, which is really identifying what are the needs, what are their priorities, what are the expectations, and setting up goals. It's also in a group information sessions, which is in covers and things that that will cover large number of people need, like employment information and park and rec information, school information, and those kind of things. And the another component which is really become more and more important now is community connections, which is really connecting to them and established Canadians, and it really become quite effective and during the Syrian refugee, where number of private sponsors sponsored and actually enhanced community connections, which is facilitating them to connect somebody who will enhance their network, but also enhance their employment opportunity, because they're connected to somebody who is established, who knows employment and information, who has a large number of network. And the other services is support services, which is like providing child minding when the workshop is happening, when language training is happening, and also if there is especially refugee the GARDs, government assisted refugees, translation and interpretation services. Upon going all that and reviewing that services they need, and a lot of referrals would be done to connect and wherever that the need is as in holistic needs assessment done indicates, and that could cover the whole family. For example, a family of 4 or 5 and with have a children, employment will be touched, school attending school, and connecting to if there is a youth services and youth opportunities is one of them, and it will be really following the plan or whatever the needs assessment and plan is. And one of the most important is that access to employment, which is really a settlement and will move forward when they are able to get employment, and that's actually most important thing. But in that process, you're also putting some sort of civic engagement, which is in connecting to them to things that's happening in their neighborhood, be part of the community, so that the cohesiveness of a community or neighborhood exists when a newcomer come. And this programming in format could be delivered by just dropping in or group settings online. In some cases, for the last couple of years, and it's delivered in successful settlement services run in the school settings, where like the Swiss program, settlement workers in a school, libraries, as well as recreation in places, faith in places, and also one of the important thing is to have flexible hours, because a lot of them are working odd hours in some cases, and access to services is important. So having weekends and evenings is also important. And looking at as a best practice is really creating a welcoming environment for them to be comfortable, and when you make them comfortable, you get more information to help them in providing in cultural appropriate services in terms of the language need, in geographical area where they can access the language, and really good listening skills to see what their needs are, again, one of the other important thing is really working with established Canadians so that you can really connect to them. The mentorship and community connections is a critical point of their success, and those and sponsored by private sponsors actually were more successful than the GARIS because they have a network that is working for them. And one of the other thing is to really foster them to be an active citizen and engagement, because at the end of the day, you want the newcomers to settle down properly and participate and create the harmony that we want to have in our country. And developing also, some of them are entrepreneurs. So now the settlement services usually to do it in a lot of information and referral. Now more and more people are asking in support for in businesses. For example, in the area we are, a lot of them are actually doing catering, sewing, and selling their services to the neighborhoods who has higher income compared to other areas. You have to also make sure that whatever you are doing there, in participating, that you are not really doing and pushing them things they might not be important for them, or things that is not helping them. And one of the system issues is actually still that exists is that access to the regulatory bodies like engineers, doctors, lawyers, all the still is a challenge, even though more and more improvements are happening, but still that is important. The other thing is that all those policy tables that newcomer issues is discussed sometimes, and they're not there, so that it needs to be recognized and build that.
I'll need you to wrap up fairly quickly.
Yes, sure. And the other part is that actually the settlement services collaboration between all federal government in provinces and the municipalities, and it's important that we really work collectively together and engage in newcomers, because the success of newcomers will contribute to the success of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll have more time when the questions come to continue that. Let's move westward and go to Ms. Ham from the Saskatchewan Intercultural Association. Thank you again for joining us.
Good afternoon. As you said, my name is Jess Ham, and I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I believe you are experiencing what I would call nice balmy weather there in Ottawa, as we are experiencing -37 with the wind chill today. I am the Executive Director of the Saskatchewan Intercultural Association, which is an impact non-profit organization founded in 1964. I'd also like to acknowledge that our organization operates on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional homelands of the First Nations and Métis people. Since our beginning, the SIA has been committed to supporting cultural groups retain distinctive cultural identity, language, and arts, while also integrating and feeling accepted into the community that they've come to. In the last 20 years, SIA has also focused on providing programs and services that empower and relieve barriers for newcomers. And when I say newcomers, I mean both immigrants and refugees. We also serve Indigenous people in the areas of securing employment, language advancement, and cultural understanding. An integral part of SIA has always been to provide anti-racist education and promote intercultural understanding to the general public through workshops, programming, and community events. SIA partners with many organizations in the community to offer a wide variety of programming, including employment skills training, English and heritage language classes, youth programming, and performing arts entertainment. SIA works towards intercultural understanding and acceptance in our community through providing intercultural education and committee work. For over 20 years, SIA has offered employment training services. One of our employment programs targets internationally trained professionals with the intention of connecting these newcomers to their career field here in Canada. This program utilizes classroom training and internship-style work placements and is funded through the provincial government of Saskatchewan. Another unique employment initiative that we provide serves both newcomers and Indigenous youth between the ages of 18 and 30 who have little or no work experience. This program not only addresses employment barriers, but it is designed to break down any cultural misunderstandings and increase participants' intercultural understanding. This program provides classroom training with allowances, paid work placements, daycare subsidies, and transportation supports. And it is also funded through the federal government. SIA also offers English language training through both federal and provincial governments funding. This allows us to serve newcomers with various statuses and provide classroom training on Canadian language benchmarks levels from 1 to 8. We offer over 24 different classes located at different locations throughout the city of Saskatoon. And we offer childcare to all of our daytime classes and a few in our evening classes. We also offer several youth programs in the community with after-school and summer programming. Our summer youth program is for newcomer boys and girls aged 6 to 18, and this program focuses on integration, education, and recreation. The program provides transportation supports and is federally funded. Our after-school programs are funded through small local grants and are not restricted to just newcomers, but focus on cultural learning and sharing through partnerships with our local schools. SIA's core has always been culture and anti-racism, so we also provide programming that values cultural difference and brings people together to learn and understand each other's values through mentoring relationships, educational sessions or forums, and bridging opportunities. We also support a network of 22 language schools that provide language training in 19 different languages in our community, as we wholeheartedly believe staying connected to language and culture is extremely important. SIA's overall goal is for our community to be an equitable place for all cultures, which means we are also embracing our role in reconciliation efforts through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Through indigenizing our own organization, we aim to provide settlement and integration to newcomers that is respectful of the Indigenous peoples of this land, while also working to support the Indigenous communities with their own growth and success. Our city, our province, and ultimately our country will thrive and be more successful when our relationships are based on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. I'd like to now read you just a few impact statements of quotes that have been taken directly from our clients. The first one is from one of our employment programs. I am very grateful to the help as it has assisted me to stand out as a confident and composed person who now feels fully understands many new cultural and social values. I am now able to exercise newly learned interpersonal skills and pushing my way forward. During this program, I learned about many new ideas and ways to prepare for resumes, cover letters, interviews, and this has provided me also with the ability to closely interact with fellow colleagues coming from different cultural and social environments. This one's from one of our intercultural mentoring programs. I found this program made me feel welcome to the city, and I was matched with a good mentor who really cares about the program. They showed a real interest to learn and share the point of view about cultures, roots, and social issues. By understanding each other's cultures, we have learned that we have similarities in our roots. This program has made me feel really welcome to the city and also to this country. This is one more from an employment program. I wouldn't be where I am today without this program. I am now seeing my daughter every second weekend, and I just bought a car. I also bought good runners that can breathe because I need them for work. If this program hadn't helped me by providing the cab so I could get to the interview or connecting to my work placement or now my job, I don't know where I would be. And lastly, one from one of our English language programs. I heard SIA offered English classes with childcare. Luckily, I got a chance to become a CLB 3-4 student. Since I joined this class, I feel happy because I do not need to worry about my child during learning English. I came to Canada 5 years ago and my first job was at a hotel. One time my manager asked me to do something but I could not understand and I felt embarrassed. Now when working, I'm able to answer the phone from my manager and I can make simple conversation with customers. My English skills have improved a lot, but I still need to work hard. I will keep learning English and never give up.
I'm going to need to get you to wrap up fairly quickly, please. Thank you.
I'm just going to do that. In conclusion, I'd like to give the following recommendations. Funding for settlement and integration in Canada needs to authentically include reconciliation with Indigenous people and recognize the devastating role that racism plays in creating barriers for newcomers while they settle in Canada. Number 2, funding and contract decisions should more often take into consideration the local context, since wide-encompassing national decisions often leave out or discount what is needed in the smaller provinces or cities. Number 3, recognize that English language training is more than just a ticket for newcomers to receive Canadian citizenship, and cutting off access to IRCC funding afterwards prevents holistic integration. English language training in CLBs 5 to 8 are essential for newcomers to be successful in our communities. And lastly, the federal government needs to put more money into employment programming that not only educates newcomers but focuses on employers and their role in the settlement process. I'd like to thank the committee for their time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions they may have later.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we go to British Columbia, and Ms. Hamel, thank you for joining us as well, and I'm glad you were able to get on video conference. That was a bit of an issue today, so I'm glad it worked out.
Yes, thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me here. My name is Jocelyn Hamel. I'm the Executive Director of Mount Pleasant Neighbourhood House, which is part of the Association of Neighbourhood Houses of British Columbia. The focus of my presentation will be on the role of neighbourhood houses in the settlement and integration of newcomers as a best practice to be looked at. Specifically, I will briefly discuss a case study and the neighbourhood house model and link some relevant research. I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to hear from my colleagues, Mr. Hussein and Ms. Ham first, because I think that there are some similarities. I am taking a slightly different tack with my presentation. I want to start by first sharing a short story from one of the respondents who participated in an evaluation of our food programs in 2017. Her name has been changed. Like many immigrants, Aya found the process of adjusting to her new life in Vancouver difficult and lonely. That is, until she found her way to the cooking club program at the Mount Pleasant Neighbourhood House. Through participation in these peer-run cooking workshops, Aya found a new way to engage with her community, make new friends, and lift herself out of isolation. For Aya, MPNH was el punto de partida, which means a point of departure, to try new things, to be more comfortable with people. It took me out of my depression, the loneliness I felt, and now I feel useful. I feel happy, and I feel more connected. From the cooking club, Aya joined a leadership training circle and started volunteering at the neighborhood house to gain some work experience and confidence and skills. She said that this support and her experience in the cooking club gave her the courage to volunteer to help organize an event at her children's school with other parents. Aya is now employed in a full-time permanent position at the neighborhood house and is excited to be able to help others like me, she says. Neighborhood houses are community-based, welcoming places where all people of any age, nationality, or ability can find a way to connect with others and to their community. As a multi-service agency, newcomers find many ways of initially engaging with the neighborhood house, and once attached, will participate, lead, and learn through a continuum of programs and services and community building. The neighborhood house model applies several principles and approaches, such as being neighborhood-based and rooted in community, safe and welcoming places that are open and inclusive to all, participant-centered and grassroots community building approaches, addressing local concerns and fostering civic engagement, multi-generational and intercultural programs and services and approaches, using strength-based and asset-based approaches that focus on capacity building and catalyzing reciprocity. I would also like to add that in BC, neighborhood houses have always been at the forefront of nurturing Indigenous relationships in the community, because that's where we are. We're in the community and we work with the people in the community. Because of our focus on inclusion and connection, we foster intercultural interactions between Indigenous people and others, including newcomers and refugees, and that this leads to more awareness and acceptance of Indigenous cultures and history. Neighborhood houses also are working very strategically towards truth and reconciliation goals at this moment in time. Newcomers have multiple needs, and research indicates that neighborhood houses are well placed to address settlement and integration needs through multiple service points and through a holistic approach. The Neighborhood Houses in Metro Vancouver project is a 4-year research project funded by a SSHRC Insight grant, which focused on several aspects of the neighborhood house model as a unique service delivery approach that responds to individual and community needs. Briefly, some selected findings of this research relate to how neighborhood houses build capacity for newcomers. Neighborhood houses met newcomers' needs, their immediate settlement needs for service and integration by offering programs for children and intergenerational services, as well as many other services, not all of which are specifically settlement programs. We create safe places of connection and support that break isolation and provide a sense of well-being and connection. We use a strength-based approach which fosters aspirations and opportunities, builds confidence and skills, and nurtures the value of community participation. We offer leadership and volunteer opportunities that often help newcomers ladder up into job opportunities. The research also specifies that newcomers reported larger increases in social capacity development than did the respondents born in Canada. And that the research shows that social capacity development for newcomers increases as their involvement in neighborhood houses increase in length, intensity, and variety. There are many, many programs and services offered by neighborhood houses that achieve the capacity building and neighborhood connection for newcomers. The example I gave at the beginning of this presentation is typical for many newcomers who face economic barriers and food insecurity when they first settle, and they turn to community organizations like ours for support. All neighborhood houses have food-related programs ranging from food distribution services to cooking clubs and community kitchens, where groups of people come together to learn, cook, and eat together. Often, we find that newcomers come to food programs as an entry point and find many other services and programs that meet their needs once they walk through our doors. In 2017, Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House conducted an evaluation process that focused on the impact of cooking programs and teaching kitchens on participants. The evaluation included in-depth interviews as well as a survey. We confirmed that our food programs have proven successful in improving participants' food and nutrition skills, but a more revealing impact, however, is that food programs are much more than just being about the food. The food programs also create social connections for people. Spending time together in the kitchen has helped people to develop strong social networks, helping them to break free from social isolation and connect them with life-enhancing supports such as housing and lasting friendships. We also learned that participants felt safe in practicing English because they were in a welcoming environment. And even those who could not speak English at all were able to participate because sign language was so much more easy to use in a kitchen than in other areas.
Ms. Hebel, I'm going to ask you to wrap up as you
Sure.
can, please. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So we also learned that they were supported to develop leadership skills, and they took risks to become a leader and teacher in cooking classes or in other volunteer positions. Some respondents attributed their experience in the program as helping them get employment. However, we learned that being involved in an inclusive and safe space provided several of our participants with the support they needed to address mental health challenges. So we feel that food programs are absolutely a best practice in a community-based organization like a neighborhood house. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the witnesses. We're now going to the part of the meeting where we turn it to the members to ask questions. And the first round is for 7 minutes with Ms. Zahid.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. for coming today as we get on to this important study. Thank you, Mr. Hussain. I hear about your good work all the time in Toronto, and many of my constituents use your services. So thank you for all the work which you do. My first question is for Mr. Hussain. Newcomer women have some specific needs, and often they need some specific programming and support to be designed to be successful. So what do you identify as the particular challenges faced by the newcomer woman, and how are you addressing them through the services which you provide?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. And especially we receive a large number of GARs, government-assisted refugees, as well as privately sponsored refugees. What we have seen is the importance of really programming something that is relevant for them, and the best option is really having that holistic assessment and seeing what the real needs are in our area. For example, there's a lot of women who are interested to do catering, and they have been successful. They have been in catering to become preferred vendors to some of the big institutions. So supporting that, and whether it's in connecting to financial support, or whether it's really giving them space so they can and access information and resources, but also supporting the child minding piece is important for women. And it's important also in the language component, because quite often, and what we have seen is that the men do speak in one of the official language, mainly in our area, English, but the language need is predominantly for women. So we really targeted number of programs that's geared to them, also which is relevant to economic development and entrepreneurship, but also in connecting to the other established women in the community. We have developed some relationship in terms of doing some work for the Science Center, which is in Toronto. In newcomer women actually they have a show that goes all over the world, and they developed a customs for them. We helped them to negotiate contract with the Science Center. So it's really there is a lot of entrepreneurship that women bring in to the table, and I think we have to really encourage them and build that, because that will really help their integration to Canada.
Our government increased funding for the settlement program for 2018-19 by nearly 5%. It was increased to $768 million. So with further increase to support more newcomers under the multi-year levels plan, by the end of fiscal 2019-20, this will represent a 32% funding increase for settlement since our government took office in 2015. So can you please tell how this additional funding is helping to improve the services for the newcomers on the ground?
Any increase of funding actually expands the reach of the people we do. We are able to hire in people who are specific to certain area. For example, recently, and the mental health was an issue with this, and the refugees who came, the Syrian refugees. So we were able to, with that resource, to get mental health services or crisis and help services, which incorporated to the service delivery that makes them improves their life and makes them their readiness, whether employment or if they are going to a business, and helps them. So it increases the number of people who goes to language classes. And for example, it's important that people learn the language so they can be incorporated to the labor market. So having more classrooms and reducing the waiting and the number of people waiting for language programs, and that helps a lot. And in our area, we have expanded the language programs. We have reduced our waiting time, and so they really impact to more people, more resources, more impact.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Hamel. with a lot of focus on language and skills training for adults, in order to get into the workforce, sometimes the youth are overlooked. So yet newcomer families tend to lean more on their children, particularly the teenagers, to assist them with the integration. So how are you addressing the pressures faced by the newcomer youth? Is there anything specific you are doing?
That's a really good question. We do have some youth workers that are addressing specifically working with newcomer youth who are in school or who may be straddling the age gap. At Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House, we actually go into the schools and work with the Swiss workers. We do some supports as well as some anti-racism workshop, just like my colleague Ms. Hammond talked about. We talk about we engage them in conversations about the roles that they might be playing. So we're helping to support them that way. But we also have programs where they can connect with other youth outside of the school, which really gives them that social support. It's very challenging because we also work very closely with vulnerable populations like the Syrian refugees. And so when we have had Syrian youth join our youth programs, sometimes the parents have had to come because they needed to see that we were safe. And the fact is that, you know, that our neighborhood houses are places that are very, very safe. And so it took a little while sometimes to actually get the buy-in from the families who were suspicious and worried about their children. So I think that that's one of the things that we do. We're able to actually create those spaces where the youth can come together with other youth and their parents are okay about that. So that's one thing. I also wanted to talk a little bit about one of my colleagues, Frog Hollow Neighborhood House. It's related again to the food. They created a social entrepreneurial program, which was really taking, I guess, reclaimed fruit and vegetables and engaging the youth to make chutneys. So this is a small program that is engaging not just newcomers, but many of the participants are newcomer youth. They get an opportunity to make a little bit of income. They learn some skills. They get, you know, attached to the workforce. And so these kind of grassroots initiatives are constantly being invented and innovated in organizations like ours in the neighborhood houses because we, sorry.
Thanks very much. I need to end you there. That's the end of the time.
Okay.
Ms. Rempel.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I move that pursuant order to Standing Orders 108, 1A, and 102, the committee meet jointly with the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security to study whether gaps in the process of the security screening for persons entering Canada have arisen over the last 3 years, both at official points of entry and between points of entry, to identify the causes and impacts of these gaps and propose potential solutions that the department officials and ministers from both immigration, refugees, and citizenship, and public safety and emergency preparedness be present for at least one meeting, that officials and elected representatives from the United States Federal Congress and Senate be invited to attend, that these meetings be held before March 1st, 2019, that the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response thereto. So I just, for my colleagues, I want to lay out 3 principles on why I think this is timely and why I think it's incumbent upon our committees to look at this particular issue. So screening, I think, is something that many Canadians feel is a reasonable part of Canada's immigration process. There have been several articles that have suggested that problems have recently arisen with our screening process, and it is incumbent upon Parliament to study this.
Could I just interrupt just for our witnesses? You'll go right back after I finish this, just so you'll understand what is happening. When a member has the floor to ask questions of witnesses, it is their right or prerogative to move a motion. This motion has been presented to the committee in the past, so it has 48 hours notice. It's appropriately Ms. Rempel's opportunity to bring a motion forward. I will tell you, we're going to ask you to stay with us while this goes on. We don't know how long it takes, but just to let you know what's happening. Thank you.
Wonderful. So just with regard to my I want to present to my colleague my rationale for a joint committee meeting, which is part of Standing Order 108-1. Also because, as our chair outlined at the start of this meeting, give a perfect example. We now have a minister Minister Blair, whose responsibility, I think, straddles both departments. We're not sure. But now these matters do kind of fall under the purview, I think, of two different committees. And so to me, that's important. But I want to read a quote to my colleagues from, this was I believe it was a CBC article. And it was from a Professor Kelly Sundberg at Mount Royal University. She said, "As a Canadian, I expect more, and I think other Canadians expect that our federal law enforcement, intelligence, and border securities agencies can work seamlessly and share information seamlessly. And if there are administrative or legal hurdles, then that's something that Parliament needs to look at." Now, this comment was made with regard to an article where there was a foreign national who entered the country illegally, subsequently claimed asylum, had an extensive criminal history, and I believe also an outstanding arrest warrant. But even though the CBSA might have raised concerns about this individual, the IRB process, which is in the purview of this committee, did not acknowledge that and still allowed this person into Canada. And I believe in the article this person may be actually alleged of committing crimes in Canada. So I just want to go through some of the stories. And again, this is not me. This is the CBC, Global News, others. So we have a story from December 13th. Botched handling of gangster refugee claimant exposes Canada's screening weakness. And again, this is from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. There is this is a very long article that talks about potential gaps in our screening processes, potentially exacerbated by the demand on our system created by people entering at Roxham Road over the last year. On January 16th of this year, there's again a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation article headline titled, "Person of National Security Concern was accidentally granted permanent residency." I believe that the Minister of Public Safety talked about, but the document that CBC obtained this information from was heavily redacted. So to me, I don't understand how somebody that was flagged as a national security concern was given permanent residency. And again, it's that interface between Canadian Border Services Agency's processes, the RCMP, our intelligence agencies, and immigration processes. There seems to be a gap there. This was reported over a year ago by Stuart Bell from Global News. Internal government audit finds gaps in security screening of Syrian refugees. And of course, this is an audit that goes through the fact that there were many people from this cohort that what should have gone, and I'm reading from the article, undergone comprehensive security checks, but were not screened before arriving in Canada. February the 4th, there is an article in the Associated Press that reads entitled, "The Canadian Border More of a Terror Concern Than Mexicans for the United States." I believe I saw another article in Global News today talking about terror threats from a certain nationality that the Americans have expressed concerns that they might be self-deporting into Canada. And so, look, I want to be very clear on the intention here. My concern is that these reports are piling up. It's day after day after day, there is a story that talks about screening processes. And today in the House of Commons, I rose and I asked the minister if he'd be willing to come to committee. The response that we got from the government representative at the time was that everything is going fine. I worry that the day after day when we get concerns like this, that if the government isn't accountable to Parliament, as Professor Sundberg talked about, that the government risks allowing a narrative that we don't want to have in Canada. We need to ensure that the processes that we have are working fully and robustly in every circumstance, and that there isn't an acceptable margin of error here. So I think, as Professor Suttenberg said, she said that this is a matter for Parliament to study. And all we're asking here is a study. There are several instances, any one of those headlines that I just read should be of concern to parliamentarians. The government should be accountable for this messaging. And I think it is a fairly reasonable request that we get, especially now that we have a minister that straddles both departments, that we should do this in short order. So, Mr. Chair, I've structured the motion. I should also speak to the components about representatives from the United States. I'm happy to discuss that with colleagues. There was an article that came out, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, where a Democratic congressman, who I believe is now the vice chair of their equivalent committee to ours, or the chair, expressed concerns about Canada's ability to screen newcomers as it relates to a relationship with the United States. And given that we share one of the longest undefended borders, I think it's incumbent upon us to at the very least, undertake a neutral parliamentary study of this matter, and also give our colleagues to the South an opportunity to appear, should they so decide to. You don't have to. I believe this is all in order and in accordance with Standing Order 108-1A and 108-2, and I would hope that my colleagues would support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a speakers list. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I listened to the debate on the motion, which is essentially to ask for a study on the security screening process, I think is really important as we enter into this debate that the work that is to be undertaken is not done in such a way that vilifies a community group or sets what I would say presumptions of community groups, and most particularly refugees, and what I would say irregular refugees, who are irregular border crossing refugees. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, you know, I've become increasingly concerned as we look at these issues and how misinformation and misrepresentation is being provided. And when that happens, it hurts everyone, Mr. Chair, and that is very concerning to me. I don't oppose, on the face of it, to look at the screening process to see how things have gone over the last number of years. I don't, on the face of that, oppose that. But I think that we need to be very mindful of that work and how it is to be done. I think it's very important also that we examine the resources and tools that have been provided for the security screening process. We know that there has been an increase in influx with respect to that, and we need to put that in context. I also think, too, that on the question around accountability mechanisms, and particularly with CBSA, there isn't one, and I think that there should be one. And so that we can look at all of this issue in a cohesive, comprehensive way, and in such a way that does not, I hope, just scapegoats particular groups or individuals. So to that end, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I would like to amend the motion by adding the following. To add for the study to include the examination of resources and tools provided for security screening, and to examine accountability mechanisms for departments tasked with security screening, including the CBSA. And I would also like to add, Mr. Chair, in terms of officials coming to the table, we should, in fact, invite officials from the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship of Canada, IRCC, the Canadian Border Services Agency, so that's CBSA, and the Immigration and Refugee Board and the IRB. I think that they should all be part of this study if we're going to embark on this process, so that we can have a cohesive look at what's going on with those departments and the resources and tools provided to them, and to ensure that we have a robust system within our various departments. And lastly, a good accountability measure. I know that CBSA is the only institution of its kind where it does not have an oversight mechanism, and I find that challenging, to say the least. And I think that should be incorporated into this review, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the discussion is now shifting then to the amendment. The amendment, perhaps you could just say it one more time because we don't have it in writing, so that the committee can understand what you had as the amendment.
Thank you. So I would add to the study to examine resources and tools provided for security screening, to examine accountability mechanisms for departments tasked with security screening, including CBSA, and the department officials from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, the Canadian Border Services Agency, the Immigration and Refugee Board be included as officials to be invited to come to the committee.
I've got Ms. Zahid and then Ms. Rempel.
Now are we debating on this?
Now it's the amendment. So the amendment has to do with two things, particularly about resources and capacity for the agencies doing the screening, as well as accountability with respect to them. That's fair?
See, the committee has started up a new study to examine the settlement services and how the newcomers integrate here in Canada. It's a very important study, and we are also doing a report on the global migration trends. So we have a lot of work, important work happening already in this committee. And this study which we are doing right now on the settlement services is very important, because this allows us to examine how Canada ensures that the newcomers integrate, get jobs, learn the language skills, and become important community members. And
I'm just going to ask the member to speak to the amendment, not the whole motion at this point. We'll debate the motion in a moment. Right now, we just need to speak to the amendment, which is about the security, the border agencies and the accountability.
See, border agencies are not under purview of our committee. They will fall in other committees. We are responsible for the immigration, not for the screening and the security purposes. That will fall under the different committees.
So I'm understanding you're speaking against the
Public
amendment
safety.
as the purview would be SECU as opposed to SIM. Thank you. Ms. Rempel, then Ms. Kwan, and Mr. Sarai.
First of all, I'll speak in favor of the amendment. I think Ms. Kwan makes actually a very good case. And I think that that's actually demonstrated by the level of redacted documents that are reported on in these stories. And I also want to echo the comments that Ms. Kwan made on the front end of her statement. I was trying to get at this, Mr. Chair, with my first my first comments, but I think Ms. Kwan put it more succinctly, which is the more headlines that we have like this and the less action that Parliament takes, the more room there is for misinterpretation or generalities to be spread in the community. This is why I started the motion by talking about the fact that the fact that Parliament has the purview to hold the government to account in these instances. We've got academics in these articles saying Parliament should be reviewing this, and that's what we've done here. It's a very benignly worded motion to simply examine the adequacies of these processes so we can have facts on the table and be working from a position of fact. What we have in these articles are redacted statements and essentially more and more stories every day. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow there's another story that speaks to this particular issue, in fact. To my colleagues' comments about this being not the purview of this committee, the government can't appoint a minister that's in charge of this issue and have him appear before both SECU, and SIM for supplementary estimates, and then argue that it's not the purview of this committee to look at the interface. That's weak sauce. Second of all, the articles that I cited, to reiterate, show gaps between the processes for collecting information on screening and how that's fed into the immigration process. So, for example, the story that I that I showed, this particular story here, Mr. Chair, I can put it in the record. Botched handling of gangster refugee claimant exposes Canada's screening weaknesses. It's Abdullahi Hashi Farah. It actually, to me, is the perfect example of where somebody has come in. There's the CBSA and the RCMP they've highlighted information, and that has not made it into the Immigration Refugee Board consideration process. So, as a parliamentarian, I think, and parliamentarians here, I think it's incumbent upon us to ask, well, why is that happening? Can we fix it? Because, immigration is important to this country, and people expect us to get the how right so that they're not questioning if. And that's what I'm asking here. So with respect, if I might just say the resettlement services study, very important, as is the other study that we've had. But this is an emergent issue that every single day there is another story about. And in my estimation, this is of utmost importance to this committee. I'm actually willing, Mr. Chair, to sit outside of regularly scheduled committee hours to do both at the same time. As parliamentarians, the public pays our salary to do work like this, Mr. Chair. I would say that we could do both. We could keep the meetings as scheduled. I'm happy to sit weekends, evenings, whenever to get this done. So I don't accept the argument that we have other things to do as adequate in this place. If anything, I would say that the security of Canadians and the integrity of our border screening processes would be of utmost importance to Canadians. So therefore, I support the amendment, and I certainly reject the arguments made by my Liberal colleague.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just in response to Ms. Saeed's comments about my amendments being outside the purview of this committee, as we know that this motion is for a joint committee to take place. We know that the screening process, the work of the CBSA, are interconnected with the work of IRCC, and particularly at the borders, and there are implications. We also know that in other immigration streams as well, the work of CBSA in terms of their work has implications for the immigration system. And so in and of itself, if I was just to move a motion to say that we should just study this at SIM without public safety, I think that would be inappropriate, and I would agree with that. But because these things are so intrinsically linked, and if we're going to look at this issue in a cohesive way, that's why I bring this issue up. In that context, right? It's meant to work in collaboration with the other department and to ensure that we have a system that Canadians can have trust in, and to ensure that we have a system to which accountability measures are in place, to which I believe at the moment is lacking. All of these issues tie into a resource question. We know that, when you have a demand, you have to resource it appropriately in order to make sure that the work is done. And so hence, I think that it would be appropriate for us to have this joint review to look at the resource aspect as well. I know that my colleague, Matthew Dubé, who is the MP on the Public Safety Committee, they will be looking at this issue as well, and he has been for some time within that committee. But that said, we have an opportunity, and I think that it would be important to take this opportunity to quash, I think, the misinformation that's being spread out there. And there are people, by the way, some of them in this very room, who spread misinformation, who insist to call asylum seekers as illegals and so on. And I think it's important to try and correct the record whenever we can. And then in addition to that, where there are situations where perhaps security screening have failed the system, for that to be examined in a clear way so as not to create an environment where an entire class of people are being misrepresented. And I think if that happens, if we allow that to happen, that would be a tremendous disservice to everyone. And I hope that that's not the outcome of this work. And so that's the reason why I support it, because if nothing else is to clear the air and to learn from the situation, and then to ensure that we reinforce in the hearts and minds of Canadians that this process, the Canadian process, can be trusted, and that if their action needs to be taken, that actions would be taken to protect the integrity of the system, and to reinforce and to ensure that Canadians have the trust and faith with the government's work on this front.
Thank you. Just before I've got Mr. Sarai, Mr. Tilson, Mr. Tabera, I want to just advise and Ms. Rempel, I want to advise the committee that the same motion was presented just in a public meeting at the Public Safety National Security Committee. It was defeated at that committee. So this does make our discussion somewhat moot about having a joint meeting. So they have decided not to entertain a joint committee meeting. That is information I think that's important for the committee to have. It doesn't, I think it does affect both the amendment and the motion itself. So I will just, I'm going to turn to the mover of the motion first and then the mover of the amendment to see whether they want any reconsideration of that, given that information. And then we go to Mr. Sarai.
Mr. Chair, I think it's disappointing that the Public Security Committee would not want to look at this issue. I think that, of course, our committee has the master of its own domain, and I would hope that my colleagues would perhaps understand the importance of this motion, given the fact that it seems like there's story day after day, and I'm absolutely positive, certain in fact, there will be more stories coming. I think this is an opportunity for the government to show that it is taking action in a neutral, fact-based way. And frankly, if this isn't done, I'm just not sure what the government has to hide and why they wouldn't want Parliament to look at this at this point in time. In favor, again, this speaks in favor of the amendment. The amendment my colleague has is actually talking about oversight and accountability. And so to me, if anything, this decision strengthens the argument to have this meeting, and I believe that we should still vote on it, and I implore my colleagues to support it.
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that information. I also just had my staff to check with my colleague at the committee, and it is my understanding, though, that the motion got defeated so quickly that my colleague, Matthew Debay, did not even have a chance to move the amendments. We actually were moving amendments on both ends, seeing as the motion was going to be appearing at both committees, and he didn't get a chance to even move the amendments. So this motion that we're debating with the amendments would be different from what was defeated at the other committee. And I do think that it does make a difference with my amendments in terms of looking at these accountability measures and the resources that's needed to do this work, and if nothing else, for the government to demonstrate that the process is strong and to provide information to Canadians, to reassure Canadians to that end. So I would like to suggest that this motion is different from that of the other one in light of the amendments that I have moved, Mr. Chair. And I would also just remind committee members, too, to Ms. Sai's point, to say that it's true the resettlement study is a very important one, but just to remind committee members, though, that resettlement study was moved back on February 6th of 2018, a year ago, approximately, Mr. Chair. We're only just getting around to it. It got bumped, as we know, with other work. And so this study, in passing it, doesn't mean to say that it has to bump this existing work either, right? There's always a way to figure out how we can schedule things, and as has been done before, if there is the willingness to work collaboratively, I'm sure that we can try and find a way to adjust and to deal with that accordingly.
Okay, I've got Mr. Sarai, Mr. Tilson, Mr. Tabara. Just before we do that, I want to just give witnesses the permission if you would like. You're certainly welcome to stay. This is a public meeting, and you're welcome to stay. However, you're also welcome to not stay. I will tell you, in my experiences, could go on for a little bit. And we also have another panel that was supposed to come on at 4:30, with my apologies to them. But I just wanted to alert you. You're welcome to stay. But I do want to give you that. Mr. Sarai.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I think the amendment goes to public safety. It's already been defeated, as stated in the other committee. I don't think it's relevant in this committee. I don't think there's any room for it. So therefore, I would ask that we put the amendment to vote, and we vote on the amendment and move on.
I'm sorry.
I accept the sentiment of that. However, I was pretty sure I can't. While I have a speaker's list, if the speaker's list is on the amendment and you would like to speak to the amendment, we will continue on that. If you would prefer to speak to the motion, we could deal with the amendment first. So, Mr. Tilson, Mr. Tabara, Madame Boucher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, there's nothing to stop the Public Safety Committee when they hear our very excellent arguments that they reconsider their position and study this. I understand what your sentiment is. The whole issue of this thing is the motion and the amendment is to keep our borders safe. And the question is, by this myriad of comments that are being made by the media is concerned, and I can tell you people that I've spoken to in my riding are concerned about the safety of our borders. And the screening is part of that process. And so it would be most important for both committees to study this, notwithstanding that they have rejected a similar motion, but that could be reconsidered. Just to comment on Ms. Saeed's remark about settlement services, to repeat what Ms. Kwan said, the motion was made a long time ago to make this, for this study to take place. Okay. This study will be the 8th time, in my memory, that settlement services has been debated. There's a report by you, Mr. Chairman, on settlement services. There's a report by your predecessor, Mr. Jevnesky, when he was chair, on settlement services. There was a report by me when I was chairman on settlement services, and there were a number of others. So that this is the 8th time. And I'm not trying to downplay the issue of settlement services. It's the most important issue that we need to talk about. But as Ms. Rempel has said, this is an emergency. I say this to you, Ms. Saeed, on comments with respect to the amendment and indeed the motion. This is an emergency because of the concern, are our borders safe? And many in this country think that they're not safe. That people are coming into this country. If that's false, well, a study would reveal that. Either we need to do something about it. We need to take some action to stop the people from coming in that are up to no good, criminally, otherwise, terrorist. Or if that is not true, we need to deal with that too. That if the statements that are being made by the media are not true, we need to deal with that. So I support the amendment and I support the motion.
Thank you. I just remind the members of the committee to attempt to address their comments to other members through me. That's a good way to do it. Mr. Tabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also want to agree with my colleagues that I believe the amendment and the motion would be in the confines of public safety. I think they would be able to talk more about the biometrics checks, the health checks, the security checks that are rigorously put in place at our borders. I just want to talk about quickly the Conservative government back in 2015. There was an article written on CTV News, and it says as the following: the Conservative government announced in the recent federal budget its intention to slash 19,200 jobs from the federal public service by 2015 as part of its effort to cut $5.2 billion in spending. So although the Conservatives are talking about a certain situation, at the same time, when it was in their mandate, when they were in government, they cut thousands of jobs, cut millions of money. Also, here, CBSA has told to cut its budget by $143 million over the next 3 years. More than 1,100 CBSA employees were given notice Wednesday that their jobs are now on the line. So it's pretty rich for the Conservatives to talk about border security when they never funded. All they did was cut to border security, whereas our government has invested heavily in border security, biometrics checks, and you can hear that day after day in question period when our minister is taking questions and talking about all the measures that have been put in place since our government came into power in 2015.
On va continuer avec Madame Boucher. No? Oui. Okay, seeing no speakers, I'm going to call a vote on the amendment.
I think I was on the list, wasn't I? Oh, sorry. So first of all, again, Chair, and I'm imploring my colleagues, the Prime Minister has seen fit to appoint a minister who has appeared before our committee that we've been kind of unable to ascertain his purview, but ostensibly sits between two departments. So I do feel that, through you, Chair, the comments that my colleague made are somewhat irrelevant, especially given that there's now a minister that straddles both of these departments. With regard to spending taxpayer dollars as a metric, I think that's a great, to Mr. Tabara's point, Chair. What I find is the government, he mentioned question period, often uses the taxpayer dollar as a metric, right? So we'll say, okay, well, how are you making the streets safer in Canada? And they will stand up and say, we have spent X amount of money. Now, I am certain that the Liberal government is more expensive. I'm certain that they are spending more money. That is not in question. I think that the metric that we're looking for is not how much money they can spend, but how safe Canada's streets are and how our immigration process is working. So the comment that was made on, I could refer my colleague through you, Chair, to. Well, first of all, I'm going to go back. I believe that a lot of the CBSA components in 2015 were programs that came to their natural conclusion, and I would say that it is incumbent upon Parliament and government to look at programs that come to their natural conclusion that might not be as effective. I think that's reasonable. But the CBSA this year, in their department performance report, I'm looking to colleagues, I believe there was a metric on the amount of goods and people that were detected that might pose a threat to the country. In their audit, it was found that only 3% of the time that the CBSA was able to do this. We have multiple news stories about gaps occurring. So my colleagues' comments that, using taxpayer dollars, expending more resources, and getting less results, ostensibly reported by the media, in terms of public safety, would be problematic in terms of accounting to taxpayer, and actually proves my colleague Ms. Kwan's point on this amendment even more, that there should be accountability on how we are spending tax dollars. It is not acceptable to spend tax dollars and then get poorer results in terms of anything, but specifically public safety. I have no doubt that this government thinks expensive programs are a metric in and of themselves, but what we should be looking at as a committee is whether or not the money that we're spending is actually working. So my colleague has just actually proved my point for me, that if the government is going to brag about spending tax dollars, going into deficit, and raising taxes, then we should be, as a parliamentary committee, examining whether or not things are safe. So I have a feeling, Mr. Chair, I know where this is going, given the result of SECU, given what my colleagues have said here. I think it's unfortunate that we can't, in a neutral setting, look at this issue. But I'm sure it will be a decision that will be recorded and noted in the Canadian public for some time to come. And I will rest my case on that.
All right. I no longer have a speaker's list. I want to call the question with respect to the amendment, which is to extend the study to include border agencies and their resourcing as well as their accountability. All in favor? All opposed? That's defeated. We go to the main motion. I don't see any speakers, so I'm going to call.
I just want to read onto the record, Chair, through you, to refute Mr. Tabara's point. This is from CBSA President John Osorski. So the actual stat is that the previous government increased the number of CBSA border guards by 26%. And Mr. Osowski says, I can say that one example to explain any drop in estimates is that there was project funding provided for several large projects. Those projects came to completion, so as they're done and moved to a steady state status, the overall budget of the agency drops. So we did increase the number of border guards by 26%. Now it's up to this government to be held accountable for their record. And today, should my colleagues vote against this motion, I would ask why they wouldn't want their government to be accountable to Canadians on the issue of screening.
Can I just clarify for the record where that testimony was?
Yes, that was in Public Safety
Public
Committee.
Safety Committee.
I believe, but I can get that source for you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
I believe it was Public Safety. I think I used to chair it. Ms. Zahid?
Thank you, Chair. We all want to keep the Canadians safe, and the safety and security of Canadians should not be subject to this politicking. This is not the time to spread fear and division by scapegoating the most vulnerable. And my colleague opposite is trying to create a fear among the Canadians to be afraid of the newcomers. But the fact is that the Canadians should feel that the safety and security system is very strong, and the safety of the Canadians will never be compromised.
Ms. Rempel?
Mr. Chair, that was very disappointing. We have in front of us a motion that is worded that actually my colleague from the NDP has supported, that talks about the need to talk to Canadians and assure them of the integrity of a system that underpins the support for immigration in this country, something that we all support. I support immigration. I support immigration done in a lawful, orderly, and compassionate manner. By making that comment, and I just want to read the wording of the motion for people who may be watching this online later. I want to read the wording of the motion one more time here. Thank you. The committee meet jointly with the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security to study whether gaps in the process of security screening for persons entering Canada has arisen over the last 3 years at official points of entry and between points of entry, to identify the causes and impacts of this gap and propose potential solutions, that department officials and ministers from both Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship and Public Safety and Emergency be present for at least one meeting, that officials from the U.S. be invited to attend, and that these meetings be held in March 1st. Mr. Chair, there is nothing in that motion that does what my colleague says it does. There's nothing. All it does is ask whether or not a process is working. And I think, especially in this election year, we have to be very careful about separating parliamentary scrutiny of processes that underpin what has been so good for this country. You know, we are a nation of immigrants that stands on the traditional territory of First Nations people. We will always be a nation of immigrants. The question is how, and how getting to that point correctly requires Parliament in a neutral setting such as this committee to look at issues like we have today. And this isn't me saying this. This is the CBC wrote this article, Mr. Chair. The CBC wrote this headline: botched handling of gangster refugee claimant exposes Canada's screening weakness. So if my colleague wants to make the argument that she just made, is the CBC fear-mongering? Is that the accusation here? You know, I'm so tired of this. On behalf of Canadians who day after day write all of our offices and say, get it together, watching 40,000 people illegally enter our country while 65,000 privately sponsored refugees 65,000 privately sponsored refugees languish. There is a question of policy here. We should be debating it. And trying to shut down debate by calling Canadians names, by trying to divide us based on that type of rhetoric is irresponsible and is actually what's leading to the polarization of our country. That is what's leading to the polarization of our country. Through you, Chair, Ms. Zahid, that was an irresponsible statement. You know, I look to you, through you, Chair, for an apology on that, because there is nothing in this motion that does anything that you said it does. I challenge you to find one thing in that motion that says what you think it says. This is the CBC reporting this story. It is our goal as parliamentarians to hold this government to account. And I am tired of being called those names. I am. I take offense to it, and I take offense to it on behalf of every single Canadian that has these questions. They pay our salaries, Chair, to answer these questions. And voting it down, a parliamentary study to look at it, and calling us names, you called, through you, Chair, the member opposite called us a name. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to scrutinize the government's policies, the efficacy of its objectives, and taxpayer funding. We're also here, I would hope, united in having a country that welcomes immigrants, that we can have vigorous policy debates on how we do that, but that we don't move to the question of if. By calling Canadians names on benign motions designed to look at government policies and hold them to account for the expense of Canadian tax dollars, we are actually wandering into the territory of if, and it's not this side of the table that's doing it. It's that side of the table, and that's irresponsible. I am proud that we moved this motion today. I'm proud to do my job on behalf of Canadians for asking these questions, and we will not put up with that type of divisive rhetoric any longer. This committee should vote in favor of this motion. If this government has nothing to hide, if everything is rosy, then these ministers should be in front of committee telling us what they're doing to deal with these headlines. Voting against this motion is supporting something very concerning. Chair, I just ask this. Can we not just, in the spirit of collegiality and our job as parliamentarians, support a motion that asks for transparency in the government, asks for them to report on metrics, and then to potentially come up with policy solutions? That's what Canadians pay us to do. If I could get an apology, that would be great. If I could get my colleague opposite to point to one thing in this motion that suggests, in this particular motion, Chair, that's in front of us, one thing that suggests what she said, great. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, the Liberal Party of Canada.
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was so hoping that we wouldn't deteriorate into this kind of situation. But always, I guess, being too hopeful. I think what is important here is this. I think to put things in context, the truth of the matter is that the Conservative Party has been vilifying refugees. They've been calling them illegals, even though the Canadian law is very clear. The Canadian law states for those who cross over irregularly for the purposes of making an asylum claim is not committing a criminal act. So I think it is in that context that perhaps where that comment might have come from Ms. Said. Not that I want to put words in her mouth, but that's the context in which this is cast. And I do worry about it, right? In terms of this motion, that it was spin into that kind of thing to vilify refugees in that way. But that said, that's why I open my comments to say that I hope that this is not what we're doing. I hope that as we work together, that the purpose of this is to examine our processes, to make sure that the integrity of the process is protected, to make sure that it's properly resourced, to make sure that it has the tools that it needs to do its job, and then, of course, to have the accountability mechanism that is required. We know that CBSA is the only such institution that does not have public accountability, and that to me is problematic, not only on the security screening, but on many other fronts as well. So if we're going to look at all of these issues holistically, that is the reason why I moved the amendment, to put it all in that larger context of what we're dealing with. And so, Mr. Chair, so I want to be very clear in terms of my intention, because I know that I get thrown out there from different sides, almost as a screen or a shield for whatever purpose. And I want to be very clear the reasons why I have moved my amendments and why it is important to do this work in that context. And it is not my intention to allow for an approach where people can use this process to vilify a group. Sometimes situations happen. We need to look at it to see what's happened there and see how we can fix it. But it's not to say the idea that is to close the borders, for example, as the Conservative have suggested, by saying that we should apply the Safe Third Country Agreement to the entire Canadian border. I do not support that categorically, and that is not the approach that I wish to see for us to undertake. Not only for this study or for any other work that we do, because when we do a work in that way, we are doing a disservice to humanity, and that is a shame for all of us.
I have Mr. Ayoub and Ms. Rempels on the list. Just before you continue, I want to let you know that if this motion was only to hold a single meeting and was the issue about CBSA and accountability, I would have ruled it out of order, because that is not the purview of this committee, and it's not within our mandate. Our mandate is given to us by Parliament, and it has very specific roles that we can undertake. It's not within our purview. However, because the motion called for a joint study, it is allowed that we could do a joint study on matters which do engage two committees. So I did allow it. I will repeat that the motion has been defeated by the other committee. I take Mr. Tilson's point. They could reconsider after our very brilliant arguments here. However, right now, as it stands, the other committee has declined to do this study with us and have not indicated that they would reconsider that motion. So right now, the motion is in order. However, it would cease to be in order if it were a single study. Mr. Ayoub is no longer on the list. Are you on the list?
I'm on the list. Sorry. Très difficile, Monsieur le Président.
It's very difficult to not make a comment on all of this, but I'm going to try to limit myself to the following. I appreciate the passion of my colleague who is claiming to defend the interests of Canadians based on the fact that her motion seems to not be going forward, and to say at the same time that the Conservatives are for immigration, and now the governing party is being told that we're being divisive. I might remind my colleague that, you know, when we're talking about family reunification, for example, 167,000 files were in a backlog when we came to power. 167,000 potential Canadians. Those are Canadian families who are waiting for family members. They were waiting for an average of 7 years to have their files studied. Now, my colleague was talking about amounts of money, but it's not about money. It's the intention behind that. And when we see figures like that, statistics like that, those are facts. And that means that immigration for you at the time for 10 years was not a priority, clearly. Whereas on our side, we quadrupled the potential number of people who can apply. And we reduced waiting times from 7 to 2 years, and we quadrupled the potential number of requests from $5,000 to $20,000. You're talking about collegiality. There are witnesses here. I'm embarrassed for the witnesses. I'm embarrassed for the public who is listening, and I'm embarrassed for Canadians who will have to watch what has been going on here. You know, we're doing a serious study on immigration, on the settlement and the integration of immigrants here. We're spending taxpayers' money so that these agencies can show us all the great work we're doing. And we're trying to find out what the government can do more to help them. And you come forward with this motion. We've never heard about your motion before. You're presenting it before, or rather during committee time. We're wasting the time of the witnesses who have come before us. And I'm really embarrassed for them because you know that that motion is not going to be adopted because of the intentions behind it are false, and that's not what is written in your motion. So we know on our side, we want to improve the situation of security. This government has never said that it wants an unsafe border, obviously. We live in a community of immigrants and public safety, and public safety rejected this. And on our side, we have studies, and we make a list of priorities. The last time, Minister Hussen was here, and you wasted everyone's time. You wasted the entire hour. We didn't even get to put questions to ministers. That wasn't our fault. It was your fault. You were the ones who were filibustering. So I'm going to stop now. And if you wish to address my comments, that's fine. But I'm not ashamed of anything our government has done, and I'm going to vote against your motion.
Ms. Rebel.
So a few comments. First of all, my colleague, through you, Chair, mentioned that he had never heard of this before, and I would advise him and his staff to perhaps become aware of the processes that we have in place through the clerk on notices of motion. He might want to become acquainted with that. In terms of it being a waste of time for the opposition to do their job and hold the ministers to account and ask for studies on things like screening processes, I think there would be many Canadians who would take offense to that. In terms of wait lists, Parents and Grandparents Program. In 2006, the Conservative government at the time inherited a waiting list of 100,000 cases. We put in place the Super Visa program and limited the number of spaces on a no-hope waiting list. And when this Prime Minister came into office, Chair, the number of cases, I believe, that were on the waiting list had been reduced to about 26,000. What this government has done is increase the amount of spots on a no-hope waiting list, and a waiting list is not the same as
just remind the
access
member
to country.
relevant to keep
Well,
on this.
I'm speaking.
You've done a very good job today being on point.
Chair,
We
Michael,
allowed him to
you allowed
rant
him
on.
to talk about this, so
We
it's
allowed
fair
him to
to
go.
rebut. Come on. To my colleague's point about terminology and vilifying people. There is a policy discussion that this country needs to have. My colleague has one position on it, and I'm not sure what the Liberal government's position on it, and that is, my colleague raised the issue of entries from the United States, whether or not people, so my colleague, I think, is arguing that people who are in the United States should be able to enter Canada and claim asylum. I would argue that people entering from the United States should not be able to claim asylum, given the Safe Third Country Agreement. I don't actually know where the Liberal government stands on this, because on one hand, the Prime Minister stands up in the House of Commons and says the Safe Third Country Agreement should apply. On the other hand, he's allowing people to enter the country and claim asylum from the United States of America. So this is a public policy discussion we need to have. We all have different positions on it. But on the point of vilification, there are large signs at every part of the border that say it is illegal to cross here. Under Canada's Customs Act, it is illegal to enter the country. The issue is whether or not, Chair Decorum,
Claim.
Order.
the issue is that those charges are stayed if somebody claims asylum. So that's why these two discussions are so important to have together. I do not believe, and the Conservative Party of Canada does not believe, that somebody who has reached the United States of America or upstate New York should be able to claim asylum in Canada. From what I understand, the NDP, I'm not clear, but they believe that they should. Those are two different opinions. We can discuss that. But to articulate the action of illegally crossing the border and violating the Canada's Customs Act as vilification is hyperbole. So I just wanted to point out, and just to be very clear, my colleague, through you, Chair, Mr. Ayub, said that the government wants to improve service and secure our borders. Then why would we not have this study? Why would the Liberals not want this study? If that is their goal, then why would we be not examining this process here? He says, again, it's this contradiction. We want to do this, but we're not going to review it in committee. At this point in Parliament, Chair, I actually thought that the Liberals would support this because this was an opportunity for them to put it out. But instead, we've got this. Wow.
Thank you. Ms. Zahid? Okay. Seeing no, Ms. Huan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to make one very quick comment, just so that we're all very clear on the question around illegal versus irregular. It's true that there are signage that says that crossing the border at the unofficial points of entry is illegal. And that is in the case where you cross over without the intent and the purpose of making an asylum claim. If I cross over to the United States today with no intention of making an asylum claim whatsoever in the United States, I would be arrested, and that would be illegal. But if I was seeking asylum for whatever reason, our law, the Canadian law, under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act states very clearly that it is not a criminal act. And when we call those individuals who cross over to seek an asylum from the United States at the irregular border crossings illegals, we are vilifying those asylum seekers in a way that is detrimental to humanity. That is my point, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to call the question now on the motion which stands. It was not amended. Recorded vote. A recorded vote.
Ms. Rempel.
In favor.
Mr. Tilson.
Agreed.
Madame Boucher.
Agree.
Ms. Kwan.
I'm going to abstain, actually.
Mr. Bayless.
Against.
Monsieur Ayub.
No.
Mr. Sarai.
Against.
Mr. Tabara.
No.
Ms. Zaid.
No.
The motion is defeated. That completes Ms. Rempel's time. At 60 minutes. So we're going to take a brief pause. I'm going to suggest we do have time to get statements from our second panel of witnesses in. If the other panel would like to hear them, I'm afraid we don't have time to ask you questions today, but I'm going, because we have 3 witnesses here who have come to join us, take just a 2-minute break, and we're going to hear 3 7-minute statements. Suspend the meeting for a moment. Call the meeting back to order, and I'm going to thank our witnesses for this, and I'm afraid you probably won't get time for questions today. However, we will get your statements read into our testimony, and we may call you back if the committee has questions that they would like to ask you. Mr. Sarai.
Just a point of order. Ms. Rempel isn't back yet. Are we waiting, or should we resume? Yeah. She'll be back.
Is Ms. Rempel coming back?
Tomorrow.
She'll be back.
Next week.
You can start.
We can
All
start?
right.
Yeah, she has an important discussion out in the hall.
Thank you, Mr. Tilson, for being here. We're going to start with Mr. Dick from the MCC, Metropolitan Mennonite Central Committee of Canada. I've done that before.
The other MCC.
Welcome. Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to speak to this committee on the issue of immigrant settlement services in Canada. Since 1979, Mennonite Central Committee has facilitated sponsorship and settlement of more than 10,000 refugees from around the world. To do this, MCC and our constituent groups interact with settlement providing organizations, or SPOs, in the 5 provinces from BC to Ontario on a regular basis. I would say that generally we as MCC have a good working relationship with SPOs, and we appreciate the Government of Canada's funding for immigration settlement services. As I've talked with refugee resettlement advocates from around the world, I realize how fortunate we are to have such a well-developed immigration settlement structure. However, there are some challenges, and of course there's always room for improvement in anything we do. In checking with my colleagues in my MCC provincial offices, the consensus seems to be that we as sponsors and they as professional settlement agencies do not always understand each other. As a result, we don't always know what collaboration looks like. As one who works in a faith-based organization, I was interested to see a report from the Kitchener-based Centre for Community-Based Research last January, which talked about the relationship between faith-based organizations and settlement agencies. The report, entitled Faith and Settlement Partnerships, Setting Immigration and Canada Up for Success, starts out making the point that many newcomers to Canada are more religious than Canadian-born residents. Therefore, they often turn to a place of worship as their first connecting point and do not always connect with government-funded settlement services. The report contends that more and better relationships between faith groups and settlement agencies can be good for newcomers to Canada and the integration process. The report found that these partnerships are already happening. The study found that 81% of settlement agencies surveyed said that they work with faith groups, and 78% of faith groups report working with settlement agencies. Nevertheless, there are barriers to these partnerships. As I looked at the barriers identified in the report, they ring true to what I have heard from sponsoring groups over the years, and I would suggest that there's not just faith groups that experience these barriers to good collaboration. So I want to highlight just a few. To begin with, the report found what I would call a lack of understanding of each other between faith groups and settlement agencies. For example, this can be manifested in a skepticism by settlement agencies about the motives of faith groups. Are they just out to get more converts, is perhaps a suspicion that people in the settlement sector may have of faith-based groups. This lack of understanding and even trust can go both ways. While the report doesn't pick up on this, I have heard people in sponsoring groups question the commitment of settlement workers because they are a professional staff and perhaps they're not personally invested in their clients as the volunteer might be. Now, I don't think that either of those perceptions are generally true. And so I think when we see those, good communication is needed so that this level of trust can be created. A second area of possible discord has to do with the understanding about what each side brings to a partnership. Sometimes sponsors lack training, and I've certainly seen that, and I've heard the frustration of settlement workers who see what one of my MCC colleagues has called helicopter sponsors, sponsors who are doing everything for the newcomer and often making them more dependent rather than independent. On the other side, sponsors can feel like their contributions are not appreciated. Sponsors have a lot to offer in volunteer time and social capital that can provide broad links to the community, and that may not always be recognized or appreciated in settlement agencies. There are barriers. These barriers are not insurmountable, but it takes work to develop a good working relationship. So how do we deal with these barriers? First, good partnerships require good communications. However, there are issues of privacy which can stand in the way of good communication. Settlement workers have an obligation to keep information about their clients private. And this is important, and that should not be eroded because resettled refugees are often very vulnerable in their new homes. Indeed, there may be times when the settlement worker learns something about the sponsor which is problematic. However, sponsors have an obligation to support the people they are sponsoring. Sponsors and settlement workers can each come with valuable insights into the process of integration, but they need to find a way to communicate about the challenges of developing a strategy together. I think it would be important for IRCC to sit down with settlement sector and representatives of sponsors to work out a protocol making sure that important information can be shared between settlement workers and sponsors and not compromise newcomers' privacy. Second, good collaboration takes planning. The advice sponsors get from IRCC is to contact a settlement service as they develop their settlement plan and shortly before the arrival of the refugee. I've done this particularly with joint assistance sponsorships where there is a clear partnership defined between the sponsors of the RAPSPO, or the Resettlement Assistance Program settlement providing organization, and the sponsor. And I think that's been a great experience. This pre-arrival meeting is an opportunity to define roles and define tasks. However, as far as I know, meetings with sponsors do not get recorded in iCare, and there's no funding for this important meeting or these important meetings. I've wondered if it would be helpful if pre-arrival meetings with sponsors could be tracked in iCare and also funding provided for the SPOs for these meetings. Building good working relationships, partnerships can take a lot of energy and time, and sometimes I think both sponsors and settlement workers wonder if it's worth the effort. I've wondered, though, if IRCC could act as a matchmaker between sponsors and SPOs. This may at times feel like an arranged marriage, but arranged marriages can work. It's worth the effort. I think it can improve this relationship, and I believe newcomers will integrate better into our communities, and in turn, our communities will benefit from the gifts and talents that they bring to Canada. Thank you.
Very good. Right on time. Ms. Stakova.
Honorable Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of Mosaic, a BC-based immigrant serving organization. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the traditional and unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Mosaic has been providing services to newcomers in BC for 42 years. Our 350 member staff, our 700 volunteers, and 300 contractors deliver services in person from 26 locations as well as online. We provide services to newcomers of all ages, all genders, including settlement services, English language and cultural competency training, employment services, interpretation and translation, community outreach, as well as specialized gender and victim support counseling services. We are also a sponsorship agreement holder, and we support Canada's refugee resettlement efforts. Mosaic services are part of Canada's settlement and integration system that serves as a model for many countries around the world. We appreciate the efforts that the federal government makes to strengthen the system through setting multi-year immigration levels with corresponding funding, with reallocating resources in response to emerging needs, and developing and streamlining the pre-arrival services. We are also grateful to our partnership with the province of British Columbia in providing settlement support for newcomers with temporary status, and thus ensuring universal access to services, which is a top priority for the settlement sector. However, as my colleague mentioned, there is always room for improvement, and I would like to share today with you recommendations that, in Mosaic's opinion, would improve the economic outcomes of immigrants. Canada needs immigrants to meet our growing labor shortages. Employers across the country sound alarmed that they cannot find the workforce that is qualified. And yet immigrants in general are more likely to be in jobs that underutilize their education, skills, and experience. A report done by the Conference Board of Canada estimated that immigrants would earn up to $12.7 billion more annually if their education and experience was recognized. Mosaic has been delivering employment programs in partnership with the Government of BC and Government of Canada for over 25 years. Working with thousands of employers and employees, we have learned that the most successful programs are the ones designed and delivered jointly with employers. Lack of Canadian work experience remains one of the most significant barriers to finding commensurate employment. Many employers think it's too risky to hire someone new to Canada. There is already a robust framework in place in Canada supporting young people in gaining work experience and successfully transitioning into the labor market through co-placements, internships, and employer incentives. We would strongly recommend adopting these models to provide relevant Canadian work experience for newcomers. Given the pace at which technological advancements are changing the nature of jobs and the skill sets required for emerging jobs, we need to recognize the role employers will increasingly play in the on-the-job training. In partnership with the BC Ministry of Jobs, Trade and Technology, Mosaic delivered successful pilots engaging employers in design of training programs, augmenting technical training with training on Canadian workplace culture, followed by an on-the-job experience where employers were able to test drive talent. Whether it's working with the BC Alliance for Manufacturing or the BC Care Providers Association, 85% of trainees landed full-time positions in their field at the end of the program. The short-term nature of these pilots doesn't allow for meaningful engagement of employers and ongoing training opportunities for newcomers leading directly to jobs. We recommend creating a permanent funding envelope for this type of industry-led training, responding to market needs. Working with newcomers with complex employment needs requires a different approach. Mosaic uses intensive case management, working with individuals to identify their skills and abilities, and then finding employers who are willing to make accommodations and adapt their job requirements. We would like to underline the need for this personalized wraparound support when considering employment programs for newcomers with multiple barriers to employment. Successful integration of newcomers requires active engagement by communities and employers. That is why settlement service providers need to be able to invest in outreach and community, building relationship with community and employers, not only deliver direct services. Integration is a two-way process. The more awareness we are able to build among employers, the more successful newcomers will be in their economic integration. Family reunification is crucial to economic success of newcomers. Long delays and barriers in processing of spouses and children, as well as parents and grandparents, leave families divided and more fragile. This is especially important for economic integration and prosperity of newcomer women, since parents and grandparents could take on childcare tasks and enable newcomer women to participate in training and the labor force. We would like to encourage the government to continue its efforts to increase opportunities for timely family reunification. Employment is a critical aspect of settlement. However, having a job doesn't mean that all settlement needs are met. It is important to have services available to address the full range of personal and family issues related to integration to ensure that newcomers can maintain their employment and progress economically. Mosaic has a long-standing partnership with the Law Foundation of BC, enabling us to provide legal advocacy of immigration, poverty, and family issues to augment our wide range of settlement services. Mosaic also engages over 700 volunteers, many of whom serve as mentors, helping newcomers not only maintain employment, but grow their careers. One of Mosaic's key priorities is developing our clients into leaders, giving them a voice and creating opportunities for applying their expertise in shaping and directing services in their communities, in their municipalities and provinces, through access to seats at advisory committees, boards of directors, taking part in community consultations, or participating in political organizations. Increasing civic engagement and involvement of newcomers requires access to training, networks, and opportunities. As the committee considers the scope of settlement services, Mosaic would like to see civic engagement as an important step in the settlement continuum. In closing, I would like to encourage the committee to focus on recommendations that recognize immigrants not only for the education, skills, and experience that they bring to Canada, but also for the determination, initiative, resilience, and adaptability they have demonstrated in successfully moving to a new country. There may be many things they need to learn about life in Canada, but what they can contribute, if given a fair chance, is much greater. Thank you.
Thank you, Merci. And Mr. Daoud, are you speaking on behalf? Yeah. Okay, very good. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. So, Honorable Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to submit a brief and appear on behalf of the Refugee Center here today. Over the past few years, our not-for-profit organization has been engaged with new and innovative ways to tackle integration in Canada. Before our launch in 2015, we studied the landscapes of services available to these populations and decided to contribute in our own way. Our center operates on three main principles: academic, social, and economic integration. Through our academic integration programs, we were able to admit over 150 refugees into post-secondary education institutions in our first year alone. We found that many refugees were missing a key prerequisite to achieve a higher level of education in Montreal, and that was IELTS and TOEFL prep. As soon as we offered these classes, we were able to achieve the aforementioned numbers. Aside from our academic solutions, we also decided to put our skills to develop and create technological solutions to better integration and immigration as a whole. Our two major technologies are Luna AI and our pre-arrival services portal. In 2017 and 18, we developed an application called Luna AI to aid refugee claimants by leveraging AI conversational abilities with newcomers through an interactive chatbot. Currently, claimants can chat with Luna in any language of choice, and in turn, Luna will control the conversation in order to extract the information needed from the claimant and then automatically fill out necessary forms back into French or English. This ensures that the claimants are accurately filling out the necessary information are guided towards the correct resources. Luna's main goals are to potentially save time for refugee claimants, legal representatives, and government workers. We are currently expanding Luna to aid more than just refugee claimants, but all newcomers in many bureaucratic processes, including work permit applications, health card, driver's license applications, immigration forms from various streams of immigration in Canada, and we're aiming for Luna to add value in terms of data integrity, automation, innovating client service delivery, collecting data trends, and eliminating fraud. As with Luna, we can better track where users are struggling or not understanding certain questions. Furthermore, it provides the correct information to users, as many newcomers are taken advantage of and given incorrect information, as they are not aware of their legal rights, nor of their obligations to Canada throughout the immigration process. Luna would therefore potentially limit the effect of crooked immigration practices throughout the country. Our second technology that's currently being developed is our pre-arrival services portal. From our research, we noticed that immigrants and sponsored refugees have anywhere between 12 to 24 months to prepare for arrival to Canada. Therefore, we created a social network portal geared at immigrants, refugees, and prospective newcomers. This web application aims to help newcomers transition into their new life in Canada before they even arrive. We aim to centralize all the services available for newcomers in one place for easy access. Also, to create a space where newcomers can interconnect and help one another. A user can create a profile, join communities that they're interested in, and they can also register for services that will be integrated directly into the web application. And these services can be either governmental or non-governmental in nature. The application will then gather data about the user and their time spent on the application. This will include tracking questions they need the most help with and services they find the most helpful. The data will then be used to provide immigrants better choices and suggested services, thus creating a proven methodology for integration based on the data we've gathered. We hope to also locate services that are either being underutilized, overutilized, or no longer needed. Some key advantages or examples of the services will be the ability for them to understand what services will be available to them before they even land in Canada. Newcomers can prepare in advance for their housing situation, what schools are like, what their registration process is, the average costs associated with their city of choice. They'll have onboarding guidance as what to expect in terms of work, labor, and entrepreneurial standards, as well as financial literacy education, enabling them to know which banks better suit their financial situation and how our banking system works. In our experience dealing with newcomers, there are many services and tasks they could have done before entering Canada that would have prepared them better in terms of integration. Lastly, we would like to shed light on our tech education programs through our social innovation catalyst called DevBlock. DevBlock acts as a technology and entrepreneurial lab to aid newcomers in tech education and building their own businesses alongside Canadians. In order to prepare the incoming refugee and immigrant population in Canada for the booming tech economy, we started a programming school. This programming school educates refugees and Canadians on the most in-demand coding languages available in the industry today. Alongside with our partners in the industry, we give these workshops throughout the week, and towards the end, the teams and the classes build their own programs to either expand their own startups or expand their profile in industry. Alongside DevBlock, we also host annual hackathons where we team up with different organizations to tackle social issues. This past year, we teamed up with Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, where the RICC presented us with 3 challenges, and we're happy to say that we solved all 3 technological challenges in just 24 hours, proving what the impact of collaboration between grassroots organizations such as ours and government can really do. This brings us to our 3 recommendations. 1, for government to work more closely with grassroots organizations to improve client delivery services to newcomers, as these organizations deal with the concerns more directly. 2, take advantage of the technological advances today to better deliver these services and track their effectiveness on the incoming population. And 3, prepare newcomers for the upcoming economy. While the current trends are promising, it is a safer and stronger bet to tap into the entrepreneurial spirit of these newcomers. This can be done by investing in incubators and technology labs geared toward newcomers such as ours. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions, hopefully.
Thank you very much. And I've just sort of used my chair's prerogative to make a decision that we'll give each party 3 minutes to ask a question or 2. Mr. Tabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. Sorry that we kind of went a little bit over time. We had less time for questions, but thank you for all the work that you do in helping newcomers succeed in our country and in our communities. My first question, because I have limited time, will be to Brian Dyke. What are your organization's experience when it comes to foreign credentials and in newcomer skill sets? How do you match that when a newcomer comes in? You know, they may have had 10 plus years experience in a certain field. What are some of the types of things that best practices that you've worked on to match employers?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We generally the people we're bringing in do not have a lot of experience. They tend to be low skilled, but certainly matching up jobs with the people and their skills is a challenge. And I've certainly heard credentialing problems, but we haven't dealt much with that because we haven't settled a lot of people with credentials, to be honest. So.
Mm-hmm. Maybe if I can maybe ask Duad if you can comment on that as well.
Same question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, we've had a lot of people who come with tech education backgrounds or especially in the engineering sector. The best way of going about it, and that's a common problem, is industry and institutions only recognize Canadian education or North American education. So the best way of going about it is getting them into what we call one-year postgraduate degree programs or diplomas. To fast-track their equivalency. They usually perform very well as well. It's a reduced amount of time, and it would only take 1 year. So there's our continuing education programs that are being offered in the universities around us that we take advantage of as well.
And maybe Stakova, if you can.
In BC, we have a number of programs that support newcomers in, again, recognizing credentials, getting additional training and pathway to jobs, even support on the job. They're called career paths. They're delivering jointly through the BC government and with support of the federal government. But they are in specific areas. There are 4 or 5 specific areas that we target. Then there's the employment program of BC that has something similar for all citizens, except newcomers might not necessarily be eligible for all the services. So there is some good practices where we can provide a path in certain specifications. What we are trying to propose is also there is a step further, the next challenge of potentially finding the employment even if the credentials were recognized, and having the opportunity to actually, practice and impress your employer.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
A little bit more?
Okay, sure.
Just building on that, sorry it's rapid fire, do you have any experience, not just working with federal government, but provincial governments and professional colleges or professional accrediting societies who would have a role in better recognizing foreign credentials, and any advice in that front, even though it's not necessarily the purview of this committee?
No, so we would have not necessarily credential, but for example, one of the pilots we did with BC Care Providers Associations, we actually worked with a college who has designed with us and with the employers a program that the cohort would go through and then move into jobs where they have to apply on the job what they learned. So that's one of the examples of working with an employer association around the common need and working with colleges.
Mr. Tilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the 3 witnesses for comments on language training. There's evidence from the IRCC and from newcomers themselves that say that language training is failing in large numbers of people. If you agree on this, what do you think's behind all this, and what can the government do to improve the success rate for language training for newcomers? We'll start off with you, Mr. Dick.
Okay, sure. Language learning is different with many different people, and I think developing different strategies for different learning styles is an important thing to think about. Some people learn better while they're in work, and having programs where language can be learned in a work setting is, I think, is one good practice I've seen, and I think should be considered. But it's certainly the challenge. The other thing that I think volunteers and sponsors bring is a chance to interact with people who speak English or French in their community as a first language more often, and so that interaction, I think, can bolster anything that's in a classroom.
One of the problems is that there's people, newcomers, that come to Canada. They don't speak French or English, and it's a serious problem. So the question is, obviously, it's being said that language training for that particular group alone is not adequate. I mean, even young children going to school who can't speak French or English, what are they going to do when they go to school?
Well, I mean, within the school, this is not a little bit out of my area of expertise, but I understand, at least in Manitoba where I live, it's the schools that are responsible for the children's language education. There's a variety of strategies that need to be sought. And
we've had groups from Syria in particular that don't speak French or English. Ms. Strakova?
Yes, so, sorry. When it comes to link, I understand that the government introduced the portfolio-based learning approach, and we've seen great results in the 4 language centers we are running. But you're right, there's certain groups that don't work well with this. There's a lot of pressure for them to progress. So we see it with seniors. We see it with individuals who might have learning disabilities, and we see it with also individuals who might have lower level of literacy, so they might not have completed education in their home countries. I believe that it'd be good to look at what would work for these groups, because it's quite stressful for them to be in the regular classes, and we would encourage looking at learning approaches that might better meet their needs.
Have you thought of recommendations as to how we can improve language training for those that don't speak either French or English, or that speak one and not the other?
very quickly.
Have I got a chance to ask Mr. Daoud?
Sure.
Yeah, I bet I do.
I don't think you can have a blanket solution to this. Different provinces have different issues. Quebec's different than the rest of Canada on this. However, I think Quebec proved to do quite well actually with their French language program, just because we have a structure in which they're incentivized to learn French by getting a stipend every week. I think one of the problems that you're facing here is the balance between getting a job or going to learn a language. So they try to balance both, and sometimes have to pick one or the other. So when they're put on these labor jobs where they don't need to meet a high qualification of a certain language requirement, then they might put that off. So then again, here you're having to balance two different issues. So if you want to create a service and if you're putting language as a priority, you should incentivize them as far as maybe it's a stepping stone to a job by some sort of stipend per week, just how Quebec does it.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'm going to start with Ms. Chikova. You have actually a tremendous story to tell as a newcomer who came to Canada, and prior to this role at Mosaic, you worked at MyTac, actually, a significant success story there. So from the lessons learned that could be transported with your own personal experiences, what do you think the government should do by way of recommendations in supporting newcomers so that they too have the chance to flourish?
Thank you. And I came to Canada 20 years ago, very eager to build my life in Canada. I came with 2 master's degrees, very good English knowledge and work experience, but it took me a while to get a job. Just because I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, I landed my first job stocking shelves at Chapters. And I was excited for that opportunity, but it wasn't quite utilizing my skill set. And it wasn't only because I found someone who took a chance on me later. And gave me the chance and saw beyond my accent and lack of Canadian experience and gave me the opportunity to work. And that was when MyTac started. I was able to progress and build my career at MyTac. So for me and in our proposal, it's so important to be able to give newcomers the opportunity, even if it's a short-term internships or co-placement where they have a chance to prove themselves, to get the first experience and get some advice from the employers. What is it that they need going forward? And so that would be our key recommendation.
So would it help, for example, if the government had a program whereby we actually have an NGO, let's say, be in touch with a group of potential employers and then to match newcomers to the jobs? For example, would that be a program that would be useful?
It would be, and it's like 3 levels. For example, copying the very successful co-op program that exists at the universities. The structure is there, it works well. Employers recognize that they not only test drive talent, they also have an obligation to help youth gain experience. And the same model, or the youth employment strategy and the programming under that could be easily applicable to newcomers.
Right, and that would also help the newcomer override this the chicken and egg problem, and that is to say that you don't have Canadian experience, but you can't get Canadian experience because you know you've never been to Canada before. To that end, I'm going to go to Mr. Duot. I visited your center actually, and you showed me some of the fantastic programming that you had. And one of the issues that you had was, in fact, that matching, and with tremendous success rate, as well as some of the technology that you have that could help government process applications in streamlining them, which would save resources on all sorts of fronts. So I wonder if you can just quickly comment on that, and because I think we're going to run out of time, and if for all of our witnesses, if you have any suggestions, additional information that you'd like to share with our committee, if you can submit it to the clerk's office so that we can receive it by way of recommendations to the government for action.
So I guess you want me to touch on the LUNA application. So yeah, the LUNA application, how it works right now is we can't launch it nationally because we're a small non-for-profit based in Montreal and we can't afford the hosting fees. But how it works is mostly refugee claimants can be able to gain information how to fill out the application. It talks to them in their native language. We've socially engineered it in a way that the questions are short and very concise. So we get concise answers. So that way the translation process is actually very accurate. We've worked with many lawyers on this, with our own legal staff that we've worked with. We found that it actually saved up to 83% of their time. Given the fact that they don't have to pay translators, they don't have to get additional counsel, they're they can get them just to fill it out on an actual phone or an iPad. So yeah, it has various amounts of uses, and where the great thing about this is that it's expansion. So beyond just the refugee claimant aspect, it can go on beyond that for other immigration processes, also for other forms and bureaucratic processes that immigrants have to go through, which can really tie into the pre-arrival services as well. So there's a very unique aspect to that, which I do recommend that government does look into it in some sense, because it can really streamline, save money, and really make things a bit more efficient on the ends, and also make things more transparent. There's a lot of crooked immigration practices due to crooked immigration lawyers. And this is something that we're facing a lot. Like, this happens constantly. And all because they're given incorrect information and they're misled. Having a centralized source of information, a database in which they can actually read in their language, would negate that tremendously. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to reinforce what Ms. Kwan said. This is the second meeting of a minimum of 7 on this study. Will be going on. I'll encourage you to follow the deliberations of the committee and either add anything from your presentations, or if you see something that tweaks something you would like to add into the conversation. All three of you have different perspectives, and we've met before, and I know a little bit about the stuff and your innovation you're doing and all that. I think is quite important. What I'm hoping the committee will get are best practices that are at smaller organizations and doing something that can inspire us to make bigger programs, and so that's why you're all here today. So thank you, and again, our apologies for having not enough time with you. Be prepared, we may call you back. Thanks. The meeting's adjourned.